They tied her to a column in her own backyard and called it Heritage. Franklin Aldridge, the long-standing mayor of Fairhollow, paraded Inez, the black woman he adopted as a child, as a prop in front of wealthy donors and polished cameras. He called it tradition. She called it survival. But when they picked Inez, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know she was the quiet architect behind every one of their victories, the woman who had saved their legacy, paid their debts, and asked for nothing. What came next wasn't just justice, it was revelation. The lies they built their name on began to crumble, and Inez didn't run, she rose. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one woman, it's about all of us. Sunlight crept through the high windows of the estate that morning, touching velvet curtains and silver platters. Beneath it all, a reckoning waited, soft, steady, and ready to speak. They said the mayor had done a noble thing. The headline read, "A second chance for a troubled girl." But no one asked Inez how it felt to be paraded on the front page like a charity case. She was only 8 when her mother died, a quiet woman who played piano at church and never wore shoes in the house. 3 months later, Inez was living in the grand white-columned estate of Mayor Franklin Aldridge. To the outside world, she had been rescued. To Inez, it felt more like she'd been placed on display. At first, she tried to earn her place. She practiced her thank yous, folded her socks just right, smiled for every photo. In public, Mayor Aldridge would rest his hand on her shoulder, the way a rancher might present a prized calf. "She's part of the family now," he'd say with that politician's smile. But at home, he never once let her call him Dad. How does a child grow when she's taught to shrink herself? The Aldridges were perfect on paper. Golden hair, perfect teeth, holiday cards printed in gloss. Inez was the dark contrast in every photo. Her stepsister Karina once whispered, "They only keep you around because you make them look generous." It stuck. Still, Inez stayed. She studied harder than anyone, danced through aching feet in recital halls, and learned to disappear in a room without ever leaving it. She memorized the names of every guest at their galas, but no one ever remembered hers. At night, she would sit on the back porch in silence, listening for something, anything that felt like home. The cicadas would hum, the wind would rustle the magnolias, but no one ever came out to check on her. Isn't it strange how a house can be full and still leave you feeling like no one sees you? And yet, in all that silence, a seed was growing. Not bitterness, not rage. Something else, something steady, the kind of strength that waits. Because one day, she would no longer be the girl on the porch. She'd be the one holding the door. Years passed. Inez Aldridge grew into a woman with quiet eyes and a mind like a locked vault. She didn't run from Fairhollow after college, though many thought she would. Instead, she came back, not because she owed anyone anything, but because she believed she could fix what was broken from the inside. By then, the Aldridge name was teetering, the mayor's approval ratings were sinking, old allies had grown distant, but no one outside the estate knew how close they were to losing it all. Except Inez. She saw the unpaid invoices, the late-night phone calls, the desperation behind Franklin's carefully rehearsed charm. She saved them. Silently. Through her non-profit work, Inez funneled anonymous grants to keep their foundation afloat. She tapped into networks she'd built from scratch, people who trusted her, not the family name. She restructured debt, negotiated with creditors, even sold her own car to keep the lights on during the winter gala season. She never asked for credit, not once. Instead, she sat in the background of every donor dinner, smiling faintly while Karina delivered speeches in sequined gowns. She watched as Franklin toasted the strength of family, never acknowledging the one person keeping it all from collapsing. What does it cost a person to be needed but never acknowledged? It was Clara, her childhood neighbor and one true friend, who once said, "Inez, you're not invisible, You're just being used by people who pretend you are. That truth hit harder than any insult Corona ever threw. And yet, Inez stayed. She stayed because part of her believed they might finally see her for who she was, not a symbol, not a saved soul, a woman who had given more than she ever received. But quiet strength is still strength, and some debts are too deep to be repaid in words. Because even as the Aldridge name sparkled in the town paper, it was Inez who held it all together, with duct tape, grace, and silence. Thanksgiving morning dawned heavy with fog, as if the sky itself was uncertain. Inez stood in the kitchen before anyone else arrived, hands moving automatically over a checklist she had rewritten 3 times. The annual Aldridge Gala, her creation from start to finish, was hours from beginning. It would be, like always, perfect. But when the programs arrived, her name was nowhere. Not in the credits, not in acknowledgments, not even under special thanks. Just a beige catering uniform folded neatly outside her bedroom door with a note. Wine service, patio station 4. She held the fabric in her hands. It was soft, like her childhood church dresses, the ones her mother pressed with lavender water. But there was no label, no recognition, only the silent expectation to serve. Have you ever looked at something small and felt the full weight of your past in it? She could have walked away, should have, but Clara's voice echoed in her memory. You don't set fire to a house you helped build. But if it's already burning, don't let it fall on you. Inez slipped into the uniform. Hours later, as champagne flutes clinked and donors laughed beneath the chandeliers, she moved like a ghost among them. No one noticed her. Not when she poured wine for a senator's wife who called her exotic. Not when she cleared plates as 2 trustees whispered how kind the Aldridges were for taking her in. And then, the crash. A glass shattered near the bar. Inez knelt instinctively, reaching for the shards. Blood bloomed on her palm. Across the lawn, Corina stepped to the microphone. Oh, don't worry, she purred. She's always been good at cleaning up. Laughter. Uneasy, but real. And still, Inez stood. Doesn't it hurt more when the betrayal comes wrapped in a smile? Then Franklin clinked his glass. My friends, he began, we have a special tribute this year. They bound her wrists in silk, led her to the column by the fountain. Meant to resemble Southern courthouse steps. Living history, he called it. But no history lesson begins with humiliation. Inez didn't struggle. She lifted her chin, her breath low and steady. In that moment, she wasn't broken. Only waiting. The silk ties bit softly at her wrists, but it wasn't the fabric that bruised. Inez was used to being held in place by things that looked gentle. Around her, guests raised their glasses, took photos, laughed with polite unease. Franklin called it a symbolic gesture. Corina smiled like a hostess. No one met Inez's eyes. And then came the sound that did not belong. A low growl of an engine, deep, polished, deliberate. Heads turned as a black Rolls-Royce pulled to the edge of the lawn. From it stepped Elijah Ward. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He walked like a verdict, every step quiet and absolute. Inez saw him before anyone else. His eyes, once warm, were cold with purpose. When he reached her, Elijah didn't say a word. He knelt. From his coat, he drew a knife, small, sharp, and gleaming. With one swift motion, he cut the silk, and then he took her bleeding hand and kissed the wound. What does justice look like when it's quiet, but unmistakable? He stood and turned to the frozen crowd. This woman is my wife, he said, voice low but ringing, and I want to know why she was tied like an exhibit. Silence swept the tent. Glasses trembled. Franklin tried to smile, to spin. Mr. Ward, this isn't what it seems. Elisha didn't blink. I hope not, because what it seems like is public humiliation. Then came the document, the proof. Inez had paid off their debts. saved the estate, sold her car, used nonprofit funds under anonymous clauses. Franklin looked at her, really looked for the first time in years. She didn't flinch. "I did it all," Inez said, "and you still gave me a uniform." The crowd shifted. Eyes once dismissive now turned toward the mayor, not with awe, but with questions. Isn't it strange how silence, once broken, can echo louder than any applause? Inez stepped down from the column, wrists red, posture unshaken, and for the first time she felt seen, not as someone rescued, but as someone who had rescued herself. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Except this time, it wasn't fiction spun by Franklin Aldridge's campaign team. It was video. Truth. The image of Inez bound to that column, Elijah cutting her free, and the look of stunned betrayal on the mayor's face. None of it could be undone. By the end of the week, Franklin had resigned. Karina's sponsors disappeared overnight. The estate, once untouchable, now faced public audits and frozen accounts. But Inez? She stayed silent. Until the town meeting. Held in the high school gym, beneath flickering lights and the creak of old bleachers, she stepped up to the podium alone. "I wasn't planning to speak," she began, "but I've spent most of my life being told not to." The room held its breath. "I was taught to make myself useful, not visible. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not carrying shame that doesn't belong to me." The applause didn't erupt, it rose slowly, like something sacred. What happens when the place that once broke you becomes the place you rebuild? Weeks later, Harper House opened its doors. The columns still stood, but one had been painted by a boy from the neighborhood. An open hand holding a key, wings unfurled behind it. They called it the Turning Point. The ballroom became a community hall. Her office overlooked the garden. The portraits of the Aldridge family were gone, replaced by new photos. Real ones. Kids painting murals. Elders laughing over chess. Clara humming in the kitchen. And in one quiet frame, Inez, Elijah, Clara, and 4 children planting herbs under the morning sun. No one looked at the camera. They didn't need to. Some nights, Inez stood alone on the porch, staring at the sculpture that had replaced the column. The wind would rise. The silence would settle. Not heavy like it used to be, but soft, peaceful. How do you know when you've come home? You don't always. Sometimes it's not a feeling, it's a choice. And Inez had chosen. She was no longer the girl on the porch. She was the keeper of the door. Sometimes, the greatest strength is the kind that doesn't make a sound. Inez's story reminds us that dignity doesn't always come from being seen. It often comes from staying true to who you are, even when no one's watching. She gave, quietly. She endured silently. And when the moment came, she stood, not to shout, but to show that grace, once rooted deep, can outlast even the loudest cruelty. For many of us, life has been filled with times we weren't thanked, weren't noticed, or were treated as less than we deserved. But what Inez teaches is this: your worth is not defined by who acknowledges it. It's defined by how steadily you carry it. And when the world finally sees the truth of who you are, let it be a reflection not of revenge, but of the quiet power that carried you through. So today, if you've ever felt invisible or overlooked, take heart. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the healing begins not when the world changes, but when you decide to live as if you are no longer waiting for their permission. It was a quiet morning when Inez walked barefoot through the old sunroom, the boards warm beneath her feet, the air still carrying a faint scent of furniture polish and time. There were no speeches, no applause, just sunlight resting on her shoulders and the sound of Clara humming in the kitchen. This was her strength now, not survival, but peace. Not defiance, but rootedness. She didn't need anyone to see her anymore. She had seen herself. And from that stillness, something new began. The house that once held her silence now held the voices of others. Children learning, neighbors gathering, a community reclaiming space once denied. The column that bound her was gone, but its memory remained, not to haunt, but to remind. Because what happened to Inez should never happen again, and the echoes of injustice must not vanish quietly. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism, so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.